I was impacted like everyone else with watching the trucker protests, and it didn't matter what side you were on. As Canadians, you were seeing an exercise in democracy, an exercise in association, and getting their voices heard. Some people saw honking and disruption. I saw people who were on their last leg, people who had been bankrupted, people who had no other choice and way to go.
I think it's about time that we started getting away from the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. There's a large pool of individuals that didn't necessarily want to partake in any medical intervention, and they should have been allowed to do so without repercussion.
I believe that, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. See, I can sound smart. Here we go. Thank you once again for having it locked to the Launchpad podcast. My name is J-Man, and this is a podcast that celebrates and champions free speech. And I am so excited to have this gentleman on the podcast today. He has sat on, well, he was actually CEO of the BC Nurses Union, also a corporate director for NAV Canada, and now he is fighting for medical freedom in both the transportation and health sectors. Please welcome to the show, Umar Sheikh from Sheikh Law. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, good afternoon, Jason. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Right. So morning and and afternoon, we're in different time zones. So you're out in BC and you've been there for a little while now.
Yeah, I've been in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia for 14 years. Greatest place on earth.
Better than here, that's for sure, in our winters. Do you take part in any type of winter sports there, or are you still doing the whole jogging, biking thing when the weather turns there?
Yeah, I'm not a big winter sport or outdoors guy. I tend to stay away from animals and nature at all times. They don't like me. I don't like them. So we do go to Whistler. We do partake in the hotels and the dinners, but we don't actually go outside and do any of those activities that other British Columbians would do. But our family is unique like that.
Right. And of course, upholding justice for Canadians. And I think it's really interesting, obviously, coming from your background, sitting on the Nurses Union as a CEO, and then, of course, working for NAV Canada. And both of those establishments basically are the ones that you are basically jousting with right now in regards to medical freedom and transportation.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't characterize it that way. I mean, I sat on the board of NAV Canada. We don't have any actions against them specifically, and we don't have any actions against the nurses union specific. What we have are ideological differences that have developed. That we saw very early on in when the vaccine rollout was taking place that you had these two camps, and it was a very absolutist position. So you had those who were pro-science and accepted everything that was being said and cheered the vaccination. And then you had those that didn't want to get it. And one became the deplorable group and one became the virtuous societal group. And I think that artificial divide was the first weak point in our analysis of whether or not we should make these mandatory vaccinations happen to folks. We looked at a lot more around virtue signaling and who was in the virtuous camp rather than what was going on behind the scenes and the impact on the individuals with their decisions they were making. And so we're ideologically separated from where I once was with the organizations, but I think that ultimately my hope is that everyone comes around in Canada to seeing Canadians as one people and not two divided classes of individuals.
Right. And what had you decide to take on this fight? I mean, I would assume throughout my experience with the pandemic that it would be kind of undesirable for people in your field to maybe take that stance. I'm sure maybe you've been called an anti-vaxxer. I'm not sure, but that's generally kind of the rhetoric that gets thrown out there when someone wants to uphold their rights or believe that they have some moral standing, some legal grounds in regards to their choice to take part in medical intervention.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was impacted like everyone else with watching the trucker protests, and it didn't matter what side you were on. As Canadians, you were seeing an exercise in democracy, an exercise in association and getting their voices heard. Some people saw honking and disruption. I saw people who were on their last leg, people who had been bankrupted, people who had no other choice and way to go. And so I was more and more involved as that was taking place. And during that time, the firm was getting a number of calls on vaccine mandate issues. We like every other firm, probably got, I don't know, 30 calls a day in the beginning of this from individuals. And initially it did not seem like something that you would want to take on just because of the reasons you had said. There was this divide in categorizations. And then there was a Saturday, and this is a real story in downtown Victoria, where I'm with my 12-year-old son, and we're walking along to the harbor, and there's a Portuguese couple with a Canadian flag. And immediately a group of woke individuals accost these folks and start yelling at them and then challenging them, saying, what charter rights do you have that have been violated? And other kind of serious questions like that. And these folks, English was their second language, but they weren't lawyers either, and they weren't able to cite specific section 2A or 7 or whatever they needed to. And so I remember saying to my son, just hang on here for a second. I can't just stand here. So I got involved. I quoted the charter sections. I told them to leave the folks alone. And then they looked up and they called me a white supremacist. And I knew at that time, I knew there was something fundamentally wrong with our discourse when Umar Sheikh is being called a white supremacist. Now, I don't think I would ever be allowed in that club. I don't think they'd let me near they'd probably let me in, but I wouldn't get out. And so, when I heard that, I knew that more than anything, this was an artificial divide. It wasn't based on anything real between Canadians. It was what we're being told about the other and how bad the other was and how good you are for getting shots 4 and 5 and 6 and whatever number you want to get to. And so, I felt compelled to get involved at that stage. I knew that it was a massive uphill battle. I had experience dealing with flu vaccine mandate cases through the nurses union in the past. And so I got involved, and very quickly we went from 4 clients who were excluded non-union BC public servants to hundreds in the public service sector, and then the aviation sectors and the healthcare sectors and automotive sectors. And we started seeing the breadth of what had really occurred here, right? I mean, there's this, when we talk about the level of harm, it's not as simple as saying, oh, so-and-so's an anti-vaxxer, I'm going to go on with my day and watch Netflix. Because so-and-so was an anti-vaxxer, they've lost their income. They've lost their job. They don't get EI. They can't afford to pay their mortgage. They can't buy their kids birthday gifts. They can't participate in the Canadian economy, and they're completely finished. And so these folks are what you're categorizing as anti-vaxxers. These are your fellow Canadians that worked alongside you every single day throughout the lockdowns and everything else that was going on. And now, like, for example, the healthcare workers in BC, you had pots and pans at 7 p.m. We were out there and making noise, and yet they were fired and bankrupted first.
Right.
They were the first ones that were tossed out the door. So when we look at that type of disproportionate impact, what results? The result has been despair, suicides. We had numbers of people in the different groups we were working with that had committed suicide. You have huge mental health issues and massive generational harm on these families.
Yes.
Is this worth it? So if the only reality you say is true is that this prevents you from getting more sick, and if that's what you believe, that's fine. But if that's the reality, then that's an individual decision.
Right. Well, you're representing Greg Hill, who is a pilot, one of my good friends that I've had on the podcast. And to echo your story in regards to the, first responders, frontline workers, excuse me, but a nurse that I know from the GTA, her name is Carla. She was also on the show, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking to see this woman who actually volunteered to take part of the first COVID unit. So she says, yeah, I don't know what this is, but she felt this duty to have to come forward and serve. That's what she wanted to do. And this is, of course, when there were no vaccines available. And that was okay. I guess people were dispensable then because we were in a state of emergency. And then when it came around time to when these vaccines were available, and she said, you know what, I think I'm good. I've done my service for the past year or so, and I feel comfortable with it. Then she's out of a job. And I think it's a very strong statement that you made in regards to it being a generational thing, because this has divided families. I have friends that don't talk to me anymore. And it's just an absolute shame and really unnecessary. And when it comes down to upholding the law, and like you said, with that Portuguese family, what is it constitutionally, like fundamentally, what is wrong with what just happened?
Well, there's many things, but it's a very convoluted layer of responsibility. So there's what happened, and then there's how you draw the lines of responsibility to the decision makers, right? And so if you're dealing with a highly regulated industry or government itself as employers, you are very likely looking at an analysis under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was based on our previous Bill of Rights. But the Charter of Rights and Freedoms has a number of different sections. In this case, we'd be looking at Section 2A, which is freedom of conscience. We'd be looking at Section 7, which is life, liberty, and the security of persons. And there we argue around the importance of employment, which is not something that's a fundamental right in Canada, but it is an argument that we make under there. We also argue around safety. And then we look at Section 15 of the Charter, which is equal protection of the law. And so within the land that is Canada, if you look at the top tier of those protections, of course, that's the Constitution of this country. And so there we will see, your main legal challenges that are currently ongoing around travel mandates. They have survived the mootness challenge, which has recently come up, which is fantastic for them. And so they're proceeding. We're seeing other challenges that are proceeding on charter grounds and human rights grounds. So when you go next from the charter, you then look at the human rights aspects of it, freedom of religion. You look at medical issues and prohibited grounds for discrimination. So what's gone wrong is many things, depending on where you've landed in this process. So some people have had their religious freedoms violated and trampled on. Some people have had what they believe is fundamental medical privacy freedoms trampled on. Some people have had their charter rights trifled with, and to the extent it's justified needs to be determined by the courts. But they've had those rights certainly trifled with. And so you look at all of those harms, but ultimately it's, in my opinion, the reality of leadership is something that needs to be looked at when we look at what went wrong and where it went wrong. This country did what I think is an astonishing thing during the lockdowns when this pandemic hit. People came together, whether that was people in the food industry, the grocery stores, the airlines, the hospitals, of course. People came together. The real divide began with our political leaders espousing that there were two classes of Canadians, and one was a fringe minority of bad people, and the others weren't. This allowed in my opinion, this allowed all of that pent-up frustration, unknown, and fear that was built up in the pandemics inside of people. It was a huge mental health event to have an outlet and to say it's these people that are still causing this harm. Now we have a defined enemy, not just this microscopic virus. So I think that's where the larger harm came from. And there you can start then seeing, the policies that don't make sense. And today we're having people terminated under a 2-dose vaccination policy. So I think that harm has to be cured from the leadership of this country. I think the courts can only go so far and will only go so far. And unfortunately, the leadership is the one that we have to deal with.
And people, I think, well, I'll speak from my experience, assuming that people will think the same, is that like, well, this is over now because we can travel and it affects everyone differently. This is very dynamic, this whole deal. And For some, their lives have been affected not so much. Maybe the furthest it went for them was they just had to come home at work, or maybe they always worked at home. And then temporary shutdowns. But then in regards to the vaccine mandates, I could personally care less about not being able to go to a restaurant and things of that nature. I know that would be a crux to your existence, as you covered right off the top. You love your restaurants. But I feel that in regards to when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to travel, like detrimental industries to have these types of mandates in place. Number one, you're just talking about people's general health and not being able to see people that are potentially dying or have very little time left on this earth. And then also just losing really good nurses like the lady Carla that I spoke of because she decided not to get poked. And then on the travel side, it's not just a leisure thing, is that people have family all over the planet, and to think that they weren't allowed to spend time and lose years when, of course, we know we only have so many and we don't know how many more that we have.
I hear your assessment, Jason. I think that there's two ways to look at mandates that I like to categorize. One is transitory decisions. So decisions that aren't trying to cause permanent change or harm, but are reactive to the, let's call it the black swan event that is the mandate, right? Or the pandemic rather. And so here you're looking at a scenario where, let's say you don't know what the virus is, you don't know what it can do, you're watching Italy and there's videos of mass graves and other things going on like that. So in this environment, making those, in my experience, making those decisions, you're never going to be right, but you've got to make some sort of headway. And so travel bans, lockdowns, banning public gatherings, I could see that. I can even allow for that in that environment because it makes sense. I think when you have the benefit, though, of understanding, or at least the capability of understanding what is working, what isn't working, I think then you can abandon those transitory decisions and make some grounded policy decisions. The issue here is we didn't see that, right? And so when you have the prime minister lifting the mask mandates on airlines just a few days ago, in contrast to everywhere else in the world and what has been going on with masks and the efficacy of masks, and even statements from public health officers on masking and what the impacts of that are, you know that we knew that information probably months ago, right? And so you could have curtailed the impact of those mandates months ago. You decided not to. And I think that's the real crux of it, is the permanent side of the harm, right? So there will have been some transitory harm, but when you start firing people, you start taking away their livelihoods, you start bankrupting them, you make it so that they can't travel around this country despite clear evidence that they're not posing any additional risk or harm. That, I think, is the greater area to focus on. But initially, you have to allow for decision makers to do whatever they have to do in reaction to what's happening.
Right. That's a very fair point, and thank you for reining that in. I often say, in regards to whatever that is happening right now, is not to get so caught up in all the other things, which sometimes is very easy to do. What I tend to focus on personally is just choice. Like, what this all really just came down to is I was just fighting for my choice and helping other people come around to standing their ground and feeling comfortable about the choice that they want to make too, whether that is to have the medical intervention or not have the medical intervention. So thank you for coming in with that very rational explanation, because at one point we all didn't know what this was. And we do rely on government to some degree to step in and make sure that we're safe. And what we're talking about here is that there's some people that feel that there was a gross overreach in regards to doing so.
That's right. Or that it went far beyond where you could have possessed the requisite knowledge to understand the issue better and perhaps not mandate certain things.
Now, in regards to precedent, and I know in regards to law, is that often what happens is there's a predecessing case, and that it generally stands as the standard as to how judgments are laid out moving forward. And I'm not sure if that's just in criminal law or just stuff that I watch on TV. Probably stuff I just watch on TV. But it's still troublesome to me that we just had Western University. There's universities that are still enforcing these mandates. And we're in unprecedented times. Like, we have not seen something like this before here in Canada, I don't think. So how alarming is it to see things like this? Or is this a just action by them?
Jason, can I just close my
Absolutely.
blinds
Yeah,
here?
yeah, yeah.
Because I've got this
Sure.
weird kind of glow happening. I think that's better.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry. Okay, you can edit that out.
No problem. You're just going to put the work on me, huh? I'm leaving that in there.
Okay.
This ain't rebel news. Yeah. So in regards to just the precedents that are being set, like, are these legal actions that are being taken by the universities? Like, they're well within their grounds to say so.
That's what the court has said. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the Western challenge occurred. It did not go in favor of the students. It went in favor of the booster. There's been a challenge on a private company that was released yesterday on a vaccine mandate that the court ruled it was legitimate and reasonable to do that. There have been arbitration decisions on the mandates that have ruled they are reasonable. And so, look, there are precedents that are developing every day. There are cases in different areas of the mandates touching on different things, like we talked about human rights versus charter rights and private rights and other rights. And so, there are decisions coming out. Ultimately, the way the judicial system will solve this issue is that there will be an appeal, and there will be a final decision, whether that's at the Court of Appeal level or the Supreme Court of Canada. But there does need to be some clear delineation of what the rights are of employees and what the rights are of employers, and more generally what the rights are of citizens of this country to not want to get a level of economic coercion where they lose everything if they don't comply with the state's mandate or directive.
Mm-hmm. And Omar, what have you learned most throughout going through this experience? Because I'm sure this has been unique. It's definitely been trying, as we have covered. So what would be your number one takeaway in regards to what this experience has given you?
Yeah, I've learned that Canadians are for the large part one of the most amazing people out there. What I saw with the folks that were bankrupted, that are still bankrupted, that are still impacted, the thousands of folks in the various different groups that we work with across this country, is I saw people come together. I saw people supporting each other. Even when the government wouldn't, they set up hardship funds and helped each other, and they're still doing that every single day. People like Greg that you mentioned, and others in different societies that we represent do that. So I saw the best of this group that had mostly lost everything and had every reason to give up and just be angry. I saw them come together and support each other. Now, we don't know if we're going to be successful in any of these cases, and we're quite honest and open about that as the environment is what it is. But we do know that if we don't try, and if we don't do anything, then we just simply accept the status quo. And we're not prepared to do that. The clients aren't prepared to do that. And so I'm hopeful that what I'm seeing translates to the broader population. And one of the things that gives me that hope is the third shot of vaccination, where 40% or so of Canadians have not received their third dose. That is a significant number of people who have said stop or enough for whatever reason. And so that leads me to believe it's very difficult to bring back those mandates, because you're going to impact a significant number of people. So I see hope as well.
Right. And now for people that feel that they've been done wrong, that there's been illegal action taken against them, whether it be they've been placed on leave without pay or whether they lost their job. At this point, is there any recourse for them legally that they could move forward on to, maybe whether it be collect a severance, maybe get their job back, whatever it might be? What would be some action steps that maybe they could take to get on that track?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways to do that, depending on how your employment is structured. So right now, we know that a number of grievances are underway in the labor arbitration world, trying to seek reinstatement for people and getting people back into their jobs.
Mhm.
On the civil claim side, you can go in for a wrongful dismissal claim depending on the company and the policy. Of course, there's specifics to it, but potentially a wrongful dismissal claim, and sue for your severance that you would otherwise be entitled to, and didn't get. And so that's another way to do that. The other way that people are supporting is there are, numbers of not-for-profit societies that have been set up around different provinces and different industries that are launching legal campaigns on a variety of areas and subjects to do with the mandates, and they can always join one of those groups and get involved as well.
Right. And I'd also like to say a thank you. I had been watching another interview, and I know that you took on some cases and helped out some people that didn't have the resources at the time. Now, that's a while back. I'm not saying everyone like load this guy up with a whole bunch of work, but just to say thank you, because that's not an easy thing to do. Everyone's out there trying to make a living. And the fact that you would take some of your dedicated time, especially with a family, your friends, and your own legal practice, and to be able to share that time with other people, I think says a lot about who you are, Omar. And I really have enjoyed this chat that we had today.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor working with everybody, and it's been a pleasure being on your show. Thanks for having me.
All right, absolutely. And maybe we'll talk again sometime in the future. And thank you so much to everyone for having it locked. I hope that you found this to be helpful. I believe that Omar has resonated with you, maybe giving you some hope, a little bit more understanding. And until next time, you take care, be well, and love simply because you can. Thank you very much, Omar. That was
I love that. I love that sign off, Jason. That was great.
Yeah, that's like my podcast is all about. It's which is why I genuinely appreciated when you kind of scaled things back a little bit, because with everything that went on over the past 3 years, it's so easy to kind of just get caught up or on a tangent, and then you completely kind of forget what frustrated you in the beginning. And I think it's really important people to come back like to the fundamentals, which was for me just choice, and trying to come at this from a place of love and abundance. And I want people from your rebel thing, you know, the left and the right. I want the left to stick around just as much as the right, because when we lose the opposition, then how do you ever come to greater understanding and better policy?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It's the old Plato playbook, right? This dialogue is the root of all knowledge, and so absolutely we need to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm very intuitive in regards to the people that I have on my show, and I'm always looking for that right person. And I came across you, and I just knew you were that guy. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to have this chat with me.
Me too. I look forward to seeing the podcast.
Good. And I'll let you know. I'll put that out. It's going to start in about 2 weeks. I launch my next season. And
Okay.
I would hope that maybe somewhere down the road, if there was something else that popped up, maybe we could have a chat about it.
Happy to.
Absolutely. All right. You take care, Omar.
Right. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.